people kind of bashing on like minorities, and I just remember like feeling a lot of shame of like, that's like me and that's where I come from. And so and I remember that I was like, wow, like I don't want anyone to know like that I speak Spanish or any of that. And so just like feeling really like just wanting to hide.
We all come alive. This is the good life. Soak in the good life.
Hi, Living Waters family. We are so glad you're joining us here today for another episode of Tea Time. So today I've got some amazing individuals. I bet you can figure out what we might be talking about just by looking at us. But we are going to engage the conversation of race and what specifically we're honing in on. What did it mean and what does it look like for each of them to find their own voice as a minority in a predominantly white world. And so we'll share a little bit of our story. I know that if you're watching this, it might bring up some emotions or some triggers for you. And so first, I just want to honor you for listening. This conversation that we're going to have today is mostly, we're just going to share our own experience and story. So we don't want, there's no checklist of like, I know this year has been hard for everyone, and sometimes it feels like you need to know everything or be on top of everything, and there's no checklist of the things that you need to learn or the things that we're going to tell you today that you're going to like latch onto. We simply want you to like lean in and listen to a story of a perspective you might not have heard or experienced before. And so I know Jessica, as we start this conversation, was just going to kind of share a little bit of what it
race-based stress.
Race-based stress, just as we lead into it to hopefully help you engage this conversation better. But
yeah, absolutely. So thank you, Christina. So again, I just want to second the honoring you, that like if you started listening and you heard this was going to be a conversation that could address race and you're still here, I just want to honor you because there's something called race-based stress. And so race-based stress, a lot of people of color face race-based stress every day. And so that means that you're constantly aware of your color, of your race, and how it could affect your world and your interactions with other people. So you think about the way your tone of voice, what you're wearing when you go someplace, when you're interacting at work and if a boss says something to you, And so it's something that's very constant. If you're a majority race, a lot of times you don't have to think about your race all the time. And so when you're confronted with it, it's uncomfortable. And it can, this is where this race-based stress comes in. And so sometimes we respond to that in different ways. Like, okay, why do I feel bad? But I'm not racist. I'm not biased, and so we get defensive or we feel guilty or sometimes we get angry. And so just know at any point of time that these are people sharing their story and they just want to share it with you. And this is no way an attack on you. So even if you feel like your identity might be attacked or, or that you're feeling stressed out, just know that it's probably race-based stress, and just take a few deep breaths and then give yourself a pat on the back for being willing to really be here with us and listen to us.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you, Jessica. So as we just get started, do you want to go around and introduce yourself really quickly?
My name is Christian and I'm from the Philippines and lived here I was born in the Philippines and moved here when I was 10 and lived here ever since. So.
I'm Dahlia. I was born in Klamath Falls, and I moved over to Medford right after I graduated high school, which was in 2014, so yeah.
Awesome. Hi guys, I'm Jess. I was born and raised in the Valley, so mom actually went to Phoenix High School.
Wow.
And then, I know I've been here a little while. Went to Grace, North Medford, Ashland, lived in Las Vegas and DC, and now I'm back home. Yeah. So it's great to be back.
And then I'm hosting today, so my name's Christina, and I probably won't share much of my story, but I might give some commentary, so some context of who I am. I'm half Vietnamese. My mom was a refugee who made her way to the States in the 80s, and I grew up in the South. I grew up in Richmond, Virginia, and so that's kind of like where my worldview is formed, and my dad is white. So, but getting things going, I'm just wondering, maybe what are some times that you experience something uniquely like maybe that your white counterparts or friends didn't experience? What was something that was unique to you because of the color of your skin or your ethnicity?
Yeah. I guess
We're all looking at you.
Pressure. Yeah. I think it's interesting thinking about it, and growing up, it seemed normal. But as a Filipino growing up in the Philippines and growing up here, basically half and half, there's this thing where coming here, I noticed that all of us Filipinos in the Philippines like want to be whiter. Like literally in the Philippines, they would have like, here we have tanning booths. In the Philippines, there's like
Skin
whitening parlors, they have whitening products and things like that. So there's like this reality that a lot of Filipinos, and I think even just in the Asian culture in general, like idolizes the Western. And so they want to look like the Western. They want to look like, they want to act like. And so then coming here, that's one of the things that I was like, almost like confronted. It's like, oh, I have never thought about it before, but then coming here, it's like became a reality. I can see why this is a thing that's happening. It's because, they're more developed, there's some innovation, and so we want to copy. And that's something that I had to wrestle with as a Filipino, and owning who I am and owning what God has given me. And there's more to that, but that's definitely something that I had to confront while I was here as a minority.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, no, I can totally relate to that a lot. So my mom is long blonde hair, sparkling blue eyes.
Yeah.
And there was me. And so she went away to college, came back pregnant with me. And so it was like very apparent from a very young age that I was different, not just from like people around me, but like from my own family. And like people just can't, people just can't help but to express like, wow, you are here, like how, like, and so it just that feeling of like not belonging. Even people would always, a lot of kids would tell me all the time, like, well, you're adopted, right? Like your mom, like, and I would ask my mom all the time, and she's like, you saw the hospital pictures. Like, I don't know, like, no, like you came from me. And my mom, just gorgeous. And so I think when I was younger, I did struggle with like this perception of beauty, but also inferiority, because you get this sense that, because I definitely got this sense, and I internalized it a lot, and it wasn't until I was older that I started to pick up on where, for me personally, I saw the way people looked at my mom, and I knew it wasn't just because she had a baby out of wedlock, it was because she had a black baby out of wedlock, and there was something that was kind of bad about black, and I couldn't quite figure out what that was, but I just got the sense that it's like, no, black means more criminal, more troublemaker, not as smart, not as beautiful, and so, I used to want my hair to be long and flowy. I'd want my eyes to sparkle like that. And I think I carried a lot of that feeling of inferiority, and I felt like I had to prove that I had to be the best at everything then. So I just I didn't feel like I could make mistakes because then it would be associated so that it was who I was, and I was like, no, like I'm not that. And so so my response to that was to fight against it a lot. And it wasn't until I got older that I started to see like that it was actually when I came into my own a little bit more appearance, I was like, well, now people can't really compare me. Maybe it's not such a bad thing. And then when I started to go out into the world, because I work internationally, and I left and I went to cities, and I started seeing things in history that I had not learned about. That's like why certain things are developed and certain things are not, from colonization to what happened here in the US to redlining to like all these things. Wow. It really, the history that I didn't have as a child, it's like, oh, this is why it's so much harder. Like, this is why the average black family makes 10% of the average white family. Like it's not just, because we grow up learning that like here in the US, if you work hard enough, you will succeed. And if you don't, you're lazy or there's something wrong with you. And so learning more about my family's history and heritage, and then the history of like things that have gone on, but from other points of views and other people of color telling their history and what actually happened, I think helped shape that a lot.
Yeah, like there's other things at play besides our own choices that affect our lives. And so, sometimes positively and sometimes negatively. Yeah.
I think one of the biggest things that I had to confront was, my mom is full Mexican, and she came to the U.S., I believe, when she was 21, and she came with my brother, who was 1 at the time, and so pretty much like started from the ground up and like worked, like very difficult jobs and like out in the fields and all of that. And so my mom raised us like in the way that her parents raised her, which is like, just like super rich in their Hispanic culture. And so when I like got into elementary school and stuff, like being around other people and kind of hearing like, like the way that they did things and just different lifestyles, like I feel like I just began to feel a lot of shame of like, wow, like that's not the way that, like that's not what we eat, and like we don't do things that way. And just some even moments of like people kind of bashing on like minorities, and I just remember like feeling a lot of shame of like, that's like me and that's where I come from. And so and I remember that I was like, wow, like I don't want anyone to know like that I speak Spanish or any of that. And so just like feeling really like just wanting to hide. And so I would say like that.
Yeah, I think we can all in some ways
Definitely.
Look back on moments in our life and be like, yep.
I'm like trying not to cry. I'm like, oh my God.
Yeah, like my little self, I'm like, oh, yep, been there. So then what does that look like for each of you guys, that like journey of finding your voice and finding and like taking ownership of who you are and how God's uniquely made you as Hispanic or as Black, or, like what's the journey of like feeling empowered to be fully who you are? What's that look like for you guys? And I also know we're probably all still on that journey in some way.
Just like in a nutshell, in 2016 I was able to go to Mexico for the first time and meet my grandpa. My grandma passed away like 7 years ago, and so the only way that I met her was over the phone. Like, but I was so humbled going to Mexico and like seeing where my mom lived and the way that they were raised and just like everything that they went through. And that was such a beautiful time for me, because I feel like Jesus was like, actually, like, this is where, like you come from, and there's no shame in that, like,
so good.
Embrace it. And so
good.
It was just so healing to have the opportunity to like experience all of that and come back and just feel so empowered with like, wow, like, yes, I come from here, and that's beautiful and that's okay, and like there's no shame in that. And so ever since then, like, it's just been this journey of like, okay, like this is who I am and I'm gonna embrace it.
That's amazing.
So awesome.
I love that.
That's amazing. My family history, I think, has played a big role in some of that pride coming up as well. But I think also just being out and like seeing So one thing I think has really, like, I wouldn't say like saved me, but like I feel like I've always felt that like Jesus was like, love one another. Like you have to love one another, and like that is like, I feel like he's like, you know what, like they can't handle very many rules without going crazy. So like let me like just like let's just make it really simple. But I don't think that you can love someone without truly seeing them. And so my journey, like I went to school for journalism and I ended up telling a lot of stories and getting into peace building. And my job was always to tell stories of people. And what I started to realize as telling all these stories, that like I was always told stories from one perspective, from one lens. And it was usually a lens that wasn't that actual perspective, right? Like there's always different groups telling us about these other groups, right? It's never like, which doesn't make sense. It's like, no, you should go to the group and like talk to hear a lot of stories of that actual group, not hear what others say about that group, you know? And so I had this amazing opportunity where I'm hearing all these stories and I'm traveling all around the world. And I'm like, wow, like how this looks different. I'm like, and so I was able to start to see like, oh, like this is God moving. This is culture. And I could start to see like, hey, like other people that love God in different cultures, like it looks different. And like their cultural rules are different. And like and how it manifests is different. And so I feel like there's just been this long journey really of Jesus like peeling off this very, American, because I thought I knew everything when I left Medford, Oregon. I'm like, oh, I know why these people are this way. Like I thought I knew everything, and just like peeling off this lens and peeling off this armor that I really had. That was like, no, I need to fight against things that are different because it needs to look this way. Yeah. And then once I was like stripped of all that, I was able to be more humble myself and to feel more true empathy myself. Actually, just like let me just try to listen and understand. So I think that has been a long journey for me. And then finally was really hearing my family's history. So I recently shared a post about this, but my great grandfather Jack, so my grandfather's grandfather was a runaway slave, and he was oldest of 6, ran away in like 1868. And he, long story short, he became the first landowner of like a former slave landowner of Texas. And he did it like, and what he did was just incredible. And he actually ended up paying for his property twice because the bank lost his note. And then the men of town found that he was about to own the land, and they came and cut the tree that he was marking that designated every pay that he had, and they cut down his tree. So he had to pay for it twice and all this stuff. But really rich story there. My grandmother has another really rich story of growing up in the Red Line District of Portland, because Oregon was an all-white state. And so her stories are incredible. And so you just have this pride of like, I'm like things I used to be ashamed of, you know, and you're like, wow, like how much strength like you have to like overcome these things, and like and it just gives you a sense of pride. And then you're just like, well, that's in my hair, that's in my skin color, that's it's represented in all these things, and you start to kind of settle into yourself.
And you also carry that strength and triumph and victory, like or that determination to not be defeated. Like that's
and so many don't have that story though. Do you know what I mean? Like how it's very rare for especially I feel like Black Americans to like actually be able to trace back what happened. And so like I've had the honor of going to Africa and seeing some of these places where slaves were shipped out and all of these things. But most of us don't have that experience, and we can't see like just like how to survive from the ship in the way that they were, you know, taken and brought, and surviving the ship, and then like and then surviving what happened here, and then learning how to and there's this really cool Netflix show called, it's like, what's it like, I want to say like something about the hog. So just put it in hog on Netflix and it'll come up. But it basically looks at African American history through food. And it's really amazing, you know, and like how because it shows how people survived and what they ate and things that are actually brought over from Africa that were here. And so a lot of us feel like, oh, like so much of our culture was lost, but it wasn't. Like we're able to bring it over even though we couldn't record it. It's like still within our food, and it's really cool.
That's awesome.
That's amazing.
That's really cool.
I just watched a documentary about Filipino food on Netflix too, and so that kind of like reminded me of that, and how there's so many memories in just the culture and and just the food, you know, that we eat. There's a lot of memories there, and so history, and so it's awesome. And like I can totally relate about the whole shame thing, because especially when you said like, you know, Black people are this or this, and like Filipinos like known for like corruption, you know, like and things like that. But what I think what transformed and what like kind of happened in me to own my heritage was like I went to ministry school a couple of years ago, and the Lord began to really confront this thing about ethnic shame that I was actually experiencing. And it was weird because after the Lord like brought that up, a couple of weeks later, I met this woman who was a missionary in the Philippines. And she was like a guest speaker at this home group. And she sat, after she spoke, she sat next to me. And then she started talking to me in Tagalog.
And she's not
And
Filipino. She's white.
And she's Filipino,
Yeah.
and she's white.
And so this white lady you don't know sits next to you,
right.
and you're
And
like reminded
I knew of her because
Okay.
she's like this big missionary in Mozambique now. But I didn't know that at the time that she was also a missionary in the Philippines. And then she just sat next to me and starts talking to me in Tagalog, my native language. And I was like, how do you know Tagalog? Right? And then later on, she's like, walked me to my car. So I walked her to her car, and then she started like prophesying over me. And she's like, you're going to give Filipino their names back. You're going to give their purpose back and things like that. And then she says that I haven't learned what love is, or I've learned more about love by unsaved Filipinos than Christians in America. And so that like took me aback because from my own history or my own perspective of what Filipinos are, it was like opposite because the stories that I was believing. And so here you have an American telling like that she's actually learned more about love, from Filipinos than Christians, and that if she said that if people would ask her like, if you were president, what would you do differently? She's like, I'd bring more Filipinos in.
That's amazing.
That's what she would say. That's what she would say.
Wow. That'll break shame off.
Yeah, right. And so it was like, oh my gosh, like a couple weeks prior, like the Lord was really like inviting me to embrace my own ethnicity and my own culture and my own heritage. And like, the Lord like gave me, her name is Tracy Evans, to say like, you're going to give, Filipino their purpose back, and you're going to tell them who they are and things like that. And so like that just broke a whole lot off of me to like, wow, I don't have to hide who I am and things like that. So that like really thrusted me into a journey about shame, like dealing with shame, dealing with this internal stuff that I was actually the one that's hiding myself. Because even in my experiences, like people would usually, I wouldn't experience them rejecting me because I was like, of my skin color. I had pretty good friends, but the more I looked at it and the Lord was revealing to me, it's like, Christian, when you actually deal with your own ethnic shame, you actually shine by byproduct. That's you actually showing up as a byproduct. But so then the Lord just unraveling that shame and owning who I am, and all of a sudden like, oh, like I do have a voice. I do have something to say, and I needed to listen to me first, or I needed to actually honor what I have to say before I can actually expect others to honor what I have to say.
Yes, 100%.
And so I was like, whoa, there's that, So there's,
So good, Christian.
but
Yeah, that's so profound.
Dang.
And
like
even
super
related to
deep.
like what you said of like, you can't love someone unless you like love who they are. So like we can't, unless we're being seen for who we are, we'll never actually fully be loved.
Right, because if you don't even see yourself, then how do you expect others to actually fool yourself? So that was like huge, that the Lord had to like break off of me. It's like, Christian, love fully who you are. And so then all the other voices can actually be silenced. And so that was like an internal struggle because like I didn't know how to love myself. And the Lord was like really showing that to me, how to do that really well.
And I think that's a story or something that everyone can relate to as well. Like learning how to be loved by the Lord and learning how to like love yourself. So I think everyone struggles with that in some capacity. And so like every person watching here can relate to that. And for us, a lot of that stems from like that we look different. But it's something that all of humanity has had to like wrestle through. And so I think that's so beautiful that the Lord like addressed that in you. Well, as we wrap up, I I've got like one final question for you guys, if you're up for it. But just knowing what you know now, what's something, it's kind of like a blended question. What's something that you would tell your younger self, or maybe you could address the audience, like what's something that you would love your white friends and community to understand or know in order to engage this conversation that's really happening and has happened for the past year on race? What would it look like? What's a piece of advice or just a piece of understanding that you want people to walk away with? Anyway,
I'm like, where the I know we are like.
I'm kind of, well, I guess I would say, like, you know, if I were to tell some my old self, is basically what I just kind of shared, is like begin honoring your personhood and celebrating your personhood and your uniqueness, because then once you actually start celebrating who you are from the very beginning, everything you create is actually comes from wholeness, and you untether yourself from all these negative perception of who you are, and then you begin to actually like just shine and watch people actually begin celebrating who you are. And that's what I've actually like seen, you know, because like once I actually stopped hiding and began celebrating myself, like I actually invited people to celebrate with me. It's like it's the weirdest thing, like it's the weirdest thing where how you cultivate your own your own relationship with yourself actually affects the way other people see you as well. It's the weirdest thing. So that's what I would tell my younger self, and what I would tell I think that's not even just about a conversation about color or race or anything anymore. That's like just in the whole spectrum of being human. It's like love your personhood and your uniqueness, and people will watch you.
Yeah, I think to kind of piggyback off of that, I feel like I would probably like tell my younger self to not hide. And just like embrace who I am as a kid, and like just don't hide. Like don't feel like that's something you have to do. And you know, like you mentioned, like that's not just like that's so everyone can take that. Like so
That's so beautiful. I think I would tell my younger self that I feel like I would be kind of hard on my younger self. I think I would tell my younger self that like to be aware of the lens that I was looking through things, and like what is man-made, and that the kingdom of God is so much actually bigger than that. Like there's no boundaries in the kingdom of God. There's no like, there's not like a designated like, you know, necessarily like right, you know, group or culture or like that. Like it's so much bigger and broader, and like and that when I was sitting there reading the Bible, like instead of looking at it using all of this small lens I had been given, I've been fed to like really try to like break away from that and like truly understand like who, like Jesus was someone who was persecuted, you know, like he was someone who like people did not get, and like a lot of times he's presented as like a conqueror, and like yes, he like conquered sin and death, but like he was so humble and he was misunderstood, and he, you know, and to have that kind of connection with, you know, I think that like could even, because that's like helps make that connection to Jesus even richer, because you're like, man, he understands, you know, what it's like. And then for, you know, my white friends, it's been such an interesting year. So this has been, so normally I feel like I have a lot of privilege, because like the way I talk and I sound and I dress, that like I experience a lot of privilege. And this has been one of the first years, like I said, this year a lot of people have been facing race-based stress. And this has been one of the first times I've actually noticed that I'm triggering people just by being who I am, just by being Black, is like triggering them. And it's like making them uncomfortable. It's making like defenses. Like I've never had so many people tell me who they voted for, and I'm like, I don't like you are okay. Like you are okay, you know? And so and just so much tension. You know, my husband has gotten a lot of much more overt things where people are yelling at him outside of trucks like when he's walking across the street, pulling up and trying to intimidate him. This was a few years ago, my husband was walking through Home Depot with my 3-year-old daughter, and he came around the corner, and the guy was holding open carry, got startled seeing my husband and reached for his gun, like while Jarek was holding the hands of my daughter.
Wow.
And he just stopped and was like, "Hey, are we okay here?" And he's like, "Oh yeah, we're fine." And so one of these things that's so hard is that fear blinds us to the pain of others.
Yeah.
And so does feeling attacked. And so when you are feeling fear, you cannot, sometimes it's hard to see people as people equal to you. It's hard to see them as, see that the pain that they're going through, that the pain that they're experiencing. And that's one of the difficult things with Black skin is often associated with criminality. It's associated, and it's not just Black skin, right? And so just to be the only way to really fight fear, because fear is the thing that could put my family at risk, right? Like, someone's breaking into my house, should I call the police, or could they think that Jarek was the threat, my husband was the threat? Like these are things that go through my mind, and the only way to defeat fear is love. And I can't think of the Bible verse right now, but there's so many places in the Bible where it says like love conquers fear. Yeah. And again, like love is seeing people. And I learned in peace building, because peace building is my work, is reconciliation can only happen with the acknowledgement of pain and wrongdoing. And so we have to be able to see each other. In order to love each other, we have to be able to see each other. We have to be able to acknowledge each other, and just be aware it doesn't mean that if we're experiencing like a physical reaction like fear or something, it doesn't mean that we're a bad person. But it might mean that we might have some bias that we all have to work on. And so really just like encouraging, I guess just encouraging love, just to continue to have your hearts open, your ears open, really trying to, like I said, like you were doing it right now by being here and listening to us is so, just so huge. These stories are so incredibly beautiful. And so that's what I would say is just for us to really focus on like how can we love how can all of us love each other better and break down that fear.
Awesome. Thanks amazing. Guys, that's so good. Thank you guys so much for sharing, and thank you for tuning in and listening to us. If you see us around and you have feedback or questions or comments even about this conversation, please don't hesitate to like ask or reach out to us. We're just excited that we get to have this conversation and hope that it sparks other great life-bringing conversations in your own life. And so, thanks guys.
Thanks Christina for inviting us.
Yeah, for sure. Love you guys.